Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Kathy Flaherty, principal at Matthews Carter and Boyce. For the past 78 years, MCB has been honored to be a trusted guide providing sophisticated business advisory services, audit and assurance, tax planning and compliance, outsourced accounting, and employee benefit plan consulting. We've earned a reputation for doing more than just keeping the books and have become known as strong, proactive partners dedicated to our clients, our employees, and community alike, and who invest in helping each adapt and grow. Thank you for joining us today. We've been hosting our Women in Business event for several years, and we presented on a variety of topics. We're excited about today's event and helping both women and men position themselves for personal and professional growth at every career stage. A couple of logistic items. The presentation will be a conversation format where my colleague, Chris Spilly, and Dr. Ebrahimi, otherwise known as Coach Ebrahimi, a series of questions and they will share their insights. We have allotted time at the end for a Q&A, so please submit your questions via the chat feature during the presentation. We will record this event, but personal recording of the event and using AI is strictly prohibited. I'm delighted to introduce our featured speaker, Dr. Nassim Ebrahimi, founder and CEO of Ebrahimi Consulting and Becoming My Stronger Me, LLC.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. I am very excited to be here today to welcome Nassim Ebrahimi, Dr. Ebrahimi, but she is affectionately known as Coach Nassim or just Nassim to her many friends and followers. And we're all friends here today, so we're going to keep it informal and just refer to you as Nassim. I know that was your preference too. So
Yes.
I have had the pleasure of knowing and working with Nassim for several years, and so when we reached out to invite you to be a guest today, I was delighted that you accepted our invitation.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Well, we are going to start with, I'm just going to share with our audience. I'd like to have them get to know you a little bit better before we jump in. So I'm just going to start with your bio, a brief bio. So Nassim is a developmental psychologist, mental performance coach, author, and speaker who specializes in helping athletes, coaches, and professionals um, uh, with developing the mental skills required for sustained performance and personal growth. Through workshops and sessions and one-on-one coaching, she equips individuals with tools to navigate stress and setbacks in sport and in life. She is a former associate vice president with Prince George's Community College. She is the founder and CEO of Ebrahimi Consulting and Becoming My Stronger Me. She has written books. She's a executive contributor for Brains Magazine, and she is a podcast host. She holds a PhD in developmental psychology from Penn State and 2 bachelor degrees in neurobiology and physiology, as well as psychology from the University of Maryland. So welcome again, Nassim, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Just listening to you list off the things that I do right now, it just made me a little tired.
Well, what are you doing?
It is very busy, but I promise they're all united and aligned to support my athletes and my clients.
Well, I just read your very impressive bio, but I would love to hear from you a little bit about your background and especially what inspired you to study the brain and this link between the mind and performance.
Thank you for the question, because I think without understanding where someone's passion comes from, I think it's hard to really understand the way in which their journey is weaving. And so for me, my passion space actually started very early on, kind of rewinding all the way back to when my sister was born. So my sister and I are 13 years apart, and just watching her grow up, watching my parents' interaction, it's different when you and your sibling literally have different parents. Fast forward, her first day of, just to understand what 13 years difference means, is her first day of elementary school is my first day of college. And that kind of gap, and in the place that I was in my life, where I started at college as a biochem major, really thought I was going to go make a difference in the laboratory environment, maybe go become a pediatrician, and get to biochem as a class and just could not. It was not for me. I started to realize I needed people. I really loved impacting people. And I started working in a laboratory environment on the psychology side where I got to work with kids that were basically the same age as my sister. And so I just started to become really fascinated with how our brains develop over time, how we learn social skills, cognitive skills, how that interfaces and affects our personal, like physical skills in the environment, how we learn, how we develop. And interestingly, if anyone kind of tracks my writings over time and the research that I've done when I was an academic, they'll see that my interest kind of aged as my sister did. And so as she became, as she got into elementary school, I was starting to study elementary schoolers. As she got into middle school, I was in grad school, I was studying friendships in middle school environments and jealousy and cliques and bullying. But I was always fascinated by how the brain development impacted our emotional capacity and our behavior, how we handled stress. So I'm going to fast forward a lot now because I took you way, way back. So the beginnings of my interest in this intersection started very, very early on. But life happens, right? I went to grad school, really focused in on developmental psychology, fell in love with teaching, and my passion was really making a difference in people's lives through education. But education can be anything. It doesn't have to be a higher education. So it started in higher ed. So I was a professor and a part-time faculty member. I did every kind of faculty role. Along the way, I also, got married. I had my first child, then I had a second child. And along the way, there were opportunities to meld my two loves of doing research and that appreciative inquiry, evidence-based, keeping the science component with teaching. And so I crossed over into the administration here in the community college sector in Maryland, and then very rapidly rose through the ranks. So I was the youngest vice president for a very long time here in the state. I worked at 4 different community colleges. My last job, as you shared, was the equivalent of a chief strategy officer. So then I was doing strategic planning and metrics. So my role really expanded into how we magnify our impact in learning, because I went from making a difference in people's lives through education, one classroom at a time, to then in the administration, institutions at a time. And then I, of course, had my Ebrahimi Consulting, which is in higher ed. And then I was doing multiple institutions at a time. Fast forward, COVID happens. A lot of us during COVID start to rethink, like, should we be here? Should we be doing this? I was on the job market for a college presidency. So I come out of the executive world now, and I decide, look, I need to hit pause. I need to understand and reflect if I'm just getting carried along on this journey or this journey is really for me. It had molded and shaped me. I absolutely loved my work. It was totally aligned with my passion space. And when I came out, first of all, very, very challenging, and we're happy to talk about that now or another time. But that decision-making was calculated, strategic, but I came out just straight resigning, not into another position. And I gave myself about 9 months to figure it out. So when you're going from leading large teams, budgets, high pressures, right, strategic plans for institutions, you're the face of all of that, to nothing, that has a huge impact on your ability to shape and think. It does free you up, but there's a lot of fear and pressure and uncertainty and imposter syndrome and all the things that bubble up. And what I did is I just took that time very seriously in reflection. And what I found was I still wanted to make a difference in people's lives through education. That had never dwindled. I still loved the mind-body connection. I still loved supporting people. And this is what I had been doing with my team, supporting people to their goals. So my direct reports, my indirect reports, all the way down my vertical, That was always my commitment, is I was going to be successful when they made it past me. Not to me, but past me. And I was always growing and developing people. But what I found is in that line of work, I had given up other passion spaces. I had given up some amount of life flexibility. I had given up some amount of like creativity and innovation and entrepreneurship that I wanted back. And kismet, I was in the right place at the right time, talking to a coach, helping him a little bit with his business and strategic planning. And he was like, you would be an amazing mental performance coach. And then that was it, like one sentence. I mean, how many times have we all had somebody say, you should do X? And we're like, yeah, okay. For whatever reason, I was open to it. I was receptive. I went and did a little bit of homework on what does that mean? And it allowed me to bring back my love of sport. I could support my own kids. They're athletes as well. I could have some freedom and flexibility. I could help individuals and teams and coaches and organizations make a difference in people's lives through education in the environment of sport, which is this really safe place to practice all the things that we use in life. And so that's kind of how we've gotten to here. And, you know, of course, now Becoming My Stronger Me has expanded. I've kind of put pause on the higher ed consulting, but the mission, the passion has always been to make a difference in people's lives. This opportunity to talk to you all is one of the first times that what I call like my past life, right? My past life, pre-Great Resignation, and my post-Great Resignation, that moment of COVID when I had a major pivot, they're now colliding because it's the same skills. So that's the long and short of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. As well as I know you, I didn't really know a lot about sort of that relationship with your sister and how that framed what you're doing. And what a beautiful, thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful reminder for all of us that, it's okay to pivot, right? It's you start here, you end here, and it's fine to pivot, and it's fine to, it's a beautiful, reminder that we all have these experiences in our lives that shape what we do and where we go and, how we end up where we are. So
And
that's
actually she was a college athlete.
Yeah.
So she, if I had been doing this work then, it could have been a resource to her as well. So even her experience as a college athlete, and actually I had her on the podcast, and I would say it's one of my, besides the fact that she's my sister, I really loved that conversation, because we technically grew up with the same parents, but we really didn't, because 13 years later, and our parents are immigrants. So the parents that I had newly coming to the United States was very different than the parents who had been here 13 years later, a lot more established, a lot more certainty, a lot more stability. And even what they were able to give both of us with what they had is really incredible. So it is, yes, I'm inspired by my sister's journey and continue to be inspired by her, of course. But the foundation really comes and is, for me, very deeply rooted in the family background.
Love that. Well, I would love for you to share with us, we've all certainly athletes have a level of stress, but we all experience stressful situations in our lives every day, whether it's preparing for a big meeting, to talk in front of people, preparing for a, job performance review. We all experience stress, but I think it's important to understand what happens to our bodies when we are feeling anxiety and stress. So maybe you could start by just explaining what physically happens to us when we are in these situations.
Right. So I do want to caveat that what I'll share is what we know happens for kind of the typical response. However, in working with individuals, I also understand that there needs to be a level of curiosity and reflection of the self, because not every person will experience stress in the same way. not just because the stressor might be different, but even the same stressor might be experienced differently. So with a bit of a caveat, and I'll speak on a bit of generalities, is the first thing that tends to happen is some sort of biological response. And everybody's a little bit different. So some people experience more tension in their muscles. Some people actually get less tension in their muscles. But the majority tend to feel muscular contraction, stress, right? A little bit of tenseness, oftentimes in shoulders, upper body, neck, lower back, right? The kind of typical spaces. Some people will literally hold the hands and they'll get the kind of a tension in their hands. We also see a heart rate difference, right? So that we're having a physiological response. And of course, then your breath pattern changes. The physiological response is deeply, deeply rooted in the brainstem, right? These are our fight and flight responses. These are core responses that we are programmed with, right? This is why if you ever watch a baby cry, right? The heart rate is up, there's, their breathing changes, their muscles get tense. They often kind of have this very jerky kind of staccato movements. It's not relaxed and flowing. So they're very ingrained and rooted. Now, as we get older, oftentimes we've been trained, guided to keep it completely on the inside. And so for those of us who hold it in, it's going to be much more important for you as an individual to notice those biological changes, because when fight or flight kicks in, the brain and its focus narrows onto the threat. It doesn't always narrow in onto the solution. It doesn't always keep you focused on kind of the broader context. It's going to narrow in on the threat. And that's a survivor instinct. That's excellent. This isn't a bad thing. But the question then is it productive? And you'll hear me use that word quite a bit. So when we think about stressors or particular internal states, oftentimes in our regular kind of cultural language, we'll put a value word on it, like good, right? This is a good emotion. This is a bad emotion. This stress helped me get focused versus this stress, like I became paralyzed by the stress, right? It's always kind of this positive, negative, good and bad. I would challenge that thinking a little bit. And this is what I talk to my athletes about. And quite frankly, when I talk to executives as well, is instead of asking whether it feels good or bad, positive or negative, ask yourself whether it's productive or unproductive in that moment for you. Some of us experience stress and it helps us be more laser focused. It helps us. So some people will say, well, I work better when I'm closer to the deadline, right? There's a hard stop. There's a deadline. They're creating a document, a presentation, supporting a team. They've got a piece of work on a project and they'll say, well, I work better when I'm closer to the deadline. Well, what they're doing is they're getting to the point where their body and mind, right, realize there's an actual stressor. And then they focus, right? They create that, I like to call flow state, right? You go into automatic and you just crank out the work and you feel more efficient and effective. Well, that stressor and the internal state that it created, that elevated heart rate, the muscle tension, and then combined with the laser focus, actually was productive. So yes, our bodies react. But the question is, do we have the skills? Have we trained the skills to move from an unproductive response, harness the emotion to a productive one? So I am not a coach that will say, don't get frustrated, don't get nervous, don't get excited. Honestly, excitement can be productive or unproductive too, right? Because sometimes we're too excited and we miss details. So instead, let's say all of the emotions have value because they're telling us something. Either they're telling us something to watch out for, they're giving us information about how much we care about that situation. I'll be honest, we don't get stressed out about things we don't care about. We just don't. We don't get mad about things we don't care about. We don't get frustrated about things we don't care about. So it's giving you some piece of information. So can we pause long enough to recognize something is happening, right? Name it. And then if it's productive, stay there. Harness it. Don't be afraid of it. Don't say, I shouldn't feel nervous if it's helping you. But if it's hindering your performance, if it's hindering you from reaching your goal, if it's paralyzing you in some way, how can you then train tools to help you move it from unproductive to productive? And that's what I help with.
Okay, that's so interesting. You never think about those things as being positive. It's always a negative. Oh, I'm nervous. Oh, I'm anxious. Oh, I'm sweating. You never think about that being a good thing. So that's really fascinating. I know you've written a lot about internal friction. Is this what you've described? Is that what is that and why is that important?
Yes. So I've used different language at different times, quite frankly, depending on the audience of the writing. So internal friction, as I like to talk about it, is what is going on in your internal state that is getting in the way of you accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish, either in the moment, short term, or long term. And that's friction, right? That when the internal state and where you're trying to go are misaligned. The internal state is not in support of you maximizing your performance. And when I say performance, I don't necessarily mean like performing, right? But whatever it is you're trying to accomplish and reach your goals. So sorry, I use mental performance language sometimes, and that's what we talk about with athletes on the field. Like it's how you are competing, it's how you are engaging, it's how you are showing up and maximizing those environments. So internal friction it just rubs, right? It gets in the way, as opposed to something that's nice and smooth and in support of. So for example, let's say you are preparing for a presentation and you're worried, right? You're a little nervous, you're worried about how it goes. And that worry, you end up spending more time worrying than on the content of the presentation. So then what happens is at some point you begin to run out of time because you've spent the time on the thing that isn't going to support the work. Quality content, thinking through or even visualizing, kind of doing mental rehearsal on how it's going to go well, the kinds of questions that you might get, the responses, or if technology fails, right? Doing the mental rehearsal so that when you get there and these things potentially happen, that you've already played it out in your mind. Now, on the athlete side of the world and the sports world, they've actually done studies where mental rehearsal or doing the task, the movement, the play in your mind is just as effective in terms of a training technique as doing it in real life, as long as you're also doing it in real life. So the World Cup is coming up. So if I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I'm going to play on the women's national team, and I visualize, let's say even 10 hours a day, that doesn't mean those mental reps are going to translate to me being able to play as great as our women's team, or I know on the men's team, the World Cup that's coming. But it supports that performance because you get additional reps in. Your mind can play out much more quickly different scenarios and help you understand and play through, well, how am I going to respond in that scenario if, I don't know, I lose power, I have no internet, I get a question, or the boss is sitting there and they don't like what I'm presenting, or I'm showing numbers to a client and they're not so happy with how something is performing. It's not my fault, but I'm the one presenting it. I'm the messenger. And so this internal friction that can occur where your internal state keeps you essentially unproductive and misaligned with your goals is that internal friction. For those of you who want to look at like what the actual concepts and frameworks are, it comes from the triangle of state, where the internal state is really affected by three things: your physiology, so your biological reactions, your language, and your focus. So things that we say to ourselves in our mind and what comes out can affect our internal state, and vice versa. Our state affects And if you think about it, your tone, right? If you're angry, your tone, the word choice, the thoughts in your head are all affected. And then also our focus. So ability to stay present, the ability to handle things in the moment are very much affected by our internal state. But when we train the outside of that triangle, right? When we train those three things, when we're able to pause for 60 seconds, take a breath, right? That's a longer exhale than inhale. That's the only part of the actual breath you have to remember, a longer exhale than inhale, because you'll drop your heart rate very, very quickly. So in 60 seconds, let's say you're in a high pressure meeting, you're, like I said, the equivalent of under the lights, right? Somebody's asking you really tough questions, or you're presenting something that maybe they see as unfavorable, maybe they even see as inaccurate. And now the pressure's on, right? Give yourself 3-4 breaths, right? Allow yourself to focus on the actual productive thing that you want to do next. Set the intention of that, and then execute that one thing. It doesn't even take a full 60 seconds, but I like to call it kind of that 60-second reset. And that kind of technique should be trained when you're not in high pressure, so that you can pull it out automatically. And it's those kinds of tools that allows us to then have more control over our internal state, that provides less internal friction and much more mental clarity.
Great. Well, I know we've all have that sort of that inner voice, or, we're our own worst critics. So I recently had a colleague say to me, and I found this, I really have remembered this, and it's really stuck with me. He trains, he's in executive communications. So he trains folks for media interviews, and, he works for a global firm. So he is training the senior leadership to be, live in media interviews. So, pretty pressure filled situation. And one of the things he said to me, and I've never forgotten it, is the reality of a situation is never as bad as your perception of the situation. In other words, you're out there and your inner voice is saying, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. I must look so nervous. I wish I didn't look this nervous. The reality is you don't look as nervous as you feel, right? Mm-hmm. And so you are just getting in your own head. Or, oh my gosh, I didn't like the way that landed. I should have said it differently. And you're spinning, right? I should have said it differently. I don't like the way it landed. And the reality is it probably landed just fine, but you are getting in your head. So how do you coach people to sort of quiet that inner critic?
Mm-hmm. So let me just say, and we call them saboteurs, right? So those inner critics that get in our way.
Right.
There's plenty of things that we say to ourselves that are very productive. So we don't want to silence the voice. We want to manage the saboteur. The saboteur is still revealing something to us, right? Just like an emotion is giving us information. It's telling us something that either we need to continue to grow in. It might be sharing with us other potential danger points that we need to pay attention to. And so I'm not a huge fan of this idea that we need to silence the voice. We need to give it voice in a more productive timing, right? We need to be able to say to ourselves, I hear you, but I got this in this moment. But I'm going to give myself space to allow you, the saboteur, right, the voice in our head, to help me process so that I can learn and grow later by telling me the pros and the cons and the goods and the bads and all the things. But I'm not going to try to silence that voice because I can find utility in it. So I think it's more about how do we train ourselves to notice when it's happening instead of spiraling with it, understand if this is the moment for that conversation or not. Right? Is this the moment where I actually need to pay attention to the fact that it's warning me of danger? Or maybe I'm not as prepared as I thought, and that saboteur is pointing it out, and it'll motivate me to just go look at my notes one more time before I step up to a mic. Right? Then we don't say that it's destructive. We're like, oh, I'm glad I paused for a minute. I needed that one more detail that I just noticed in my notes. And so again, I think our default behaviors, especially those that are deeply rooted in innate processes, especially in the brain, it's more about how do we manage it to become more successful and to harness its utility and not be paralyzed by these things that are innately us. Right? They are serving a purpose. So in terms of the voices in our head, find regular ways to give them space. So oftentimes, and my athletes all journal, and some people don't like journaling per se, but how do you sit, pause at the end of your day and reflect on basically the same questions, right? So I'll tell you what I give my athletes, but I've created a one pager for this audience that I think is a little bit more appropriate in the executive and the professional world. So if our participants and our listeners want to email me after, I'm happy to share that. But I came up with some reflection questions that I think could be helpful for the professional space. But let me just share what I give my athletes. So for my athletes, I ask them to answer some critical questions. I ask them to answer, what am I proud of today? Well, what did I do today? Just so that there's a little bit of a log of the kind of day that it was. What am I proud of today? What feedback did I get that I want to remember? What do I want to focus on next time? And the last one is optional because I have my more advanced athletes create a theme of the week, right? Something they consistently look for and work on every day. But then that last question is, how did I do on the theme of the week? Now, that doesn't always apply to everybody, but those three questions, even if I think about it right now, I could have just put those three questions on that one pager. What am I proud of? What feedback did I receive that I want to remember? And what do I want to focus on next time? And notice it's not tomorrow, because sometimes next time is your next presentation. And that might not come for another few months, right? Sometimes it'll be something that you want to do immediately the next morning. But it allows a little bit of that flexibility. And so it's these kinds of tools that help give those voices space. And then in the moment with the voice, it's more about thanking it, recognizing it, thanking it, and deciding whether this is the moment that voice is productive, or do I need to revisit and learn and grow and give it space. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, very. And those are already some great tips. Is there anything else in terms of an actionable tip that you can give us that for those of us who, might want to avoid a situation that we know is going to be, so rather than, make ourselves do it, we're going to try to avoid it, right? We're going to try to avoid the big presentation. There's a opportunity to volunteer for something, and we know it'll be good for our careers, but it's going to make us anxious. So we're going to avoid it. Is there anything you can share with us for that sort of, you know, desire to avoid situations that cause us to feel anxious rather than sort of forge ahead and try to manage them and, hopefully leading to thriving in them. But before we even get there, the avoidance issue.
Yeah, so some of the things I've already mentioned are great tools here. So breath work allows you to kind of control a little bit of the physiological reaction, because sometimes we have those reactions and the stressor doesn't exist yet. We're just thinking about the stressor has our body responding. So finding spaces and ways to create that mental clarity so you can really think through it in a more productive way, in a more clear way. So you're not kind of making a gut reaction. Instead, it's a little bit more thoughtful, creating pause, right? Moments of silence and moments of pause, excellent tool. So I've already talked about breath work. I talked a little bit about visualization. All this can be very intentional, right? Really thinking through, well, what am I really avoiding here, right? Or what story am I telling myself about whatever it is I'm about to avoid? And am I lying to myself? Like, what's fact and what's fiction? And is the fiction true, or have I chosen to lie to myself? Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like lying to myself. I don't. I like to live especially for myself. I mean, and others obviously too, but I don't want to lie to myself. So what story am I telling myself? And then what would I do if I actually trusted myself? Like, what would that look like in this situation? Sometimes we ask ourselves all those questions and we actually thoughtfully decide not to engage.
Mm.
The outcome is the same, right? This isn't about, oh, now if I go through this, I'm going to say yes all the time, and then I'm going to be overburdened by all the things I'm going to say yes to. No. I'm not saying you're going to say yes. I'm just going to say it's going to be a more intentional outcome instead of kind of a gut reaction outcome. The tool that I haven't talked about yet. So we talked about emotions being productive or unproductive. I think that reframing of emotions is very helpful in situations like this. Of course, breath work, visualization, self-talk, what we talked about with the saboteurs. And then, asking yourself some of these questions about what am I avoiding? What story am I telling myself? Another great tool. I think the last concept that you haven't quite asked yet, but I think it's related here, and I want to kind of drop it in here, is sometimes when we talk about avoiding situations, people will use the word confidence in that situation. I'm not confident that, and then fill in the blank, that I can do or be in this environment successfully. And then the response that they typically get is, oh, you're going to be fine. Just don't worry about it. Be confident. And we hear this with the athletes too, right? Coaches are always like, play with confidence, be confident. Let me just tell you, if we could just be confident, we would. Confidence feels amazing. So most people don't like to operate from a place of not being confident. But when we say, just be confident, you'll be fine, what we're not giving people is, well, how do I do that? How do I muster confidence? It's hard to be something that isn't clear. So what I've done in a lot of conversations with my athletes now have kind of created a simplified, what I call confidence equation. Just a math problem that allows, and it doesn't work exactly right. So I know I'm talking to a lot of CPAs and you're going to find the mathematical flaw in the logic. It's meant to just be a general frame. So with the caveat of, it doesn't exactly work. It's just meant to kind of give us something to anchor. But as a concept, the confidence equation, so what I will write on usually a whiteboard is confidence equals trusting your skills plus owning your role. So super simple. Addition and only two numbers, right? Confidence equals trusting your skills, but owning your role. And the idea is confidence isn't about being high confident all the time. Confidence, really, the best confidence to have is unshakable confidence. So instead of like, you're really confident in some situations and really not confident in others, and you might look amazing up here and then not so great down here, that is still a very not confident person. A confident person, their ebbs and flows are very small, right? Those peaks and valleys, they're not as high. Their highs are not as high. Their lows are not as low. They're just, and it doesn't have to do with your affect, right? It doesn't have to do with how you're emoting, but it has to do with how much your environment, those external factors, shake you, rattle you. And when we say someone is confident, kind of that true to the core, or when we see it, right? Oftentimes they're like, they have that it factor. They're always confident. They have doubt. That doesn't mean they lack doubts. That doesn't mean they don't get nervous. No, they do all of those things. But that confidence comes from within. It doesn't come from their reaction to the external feedback or the external environment. And so how do we create that stable confidence? This is why I made it an addition problem. So now I'm going to put some numbers to it. So let's pretend that we're trying to keep confidence at a 10. just to keep the numbers simple. If you're equally trusting your skills and owning your role, you're at a 5 each, right? 5 plus 5 equals 10. Simple. And that's great, right? Everything's kind of in balance. But now let's say you get a different role at your organization. And imposter syndrome sits in. Well, imposter syndrome, part of it is because you're not confident, right? You don't feel like you can do what it is you're expected to do in this new role. So what happened? Your role, owning your role, probably because the knowledge of the role goes down. So in order to keep confidence at a 10, mathematically, what would need to happen? Trusting your skills has to go up. So just as an example, confidence started at 5 plus 5. Owning our role went down to a 2 because we're still learning the role. In order to keep confidence unshakable at a 10, now we have to trust our skills more. We have to turn it up to an 8. So this is why I make it kind of a math problem. So when things happen, there's another element to rely on. And notice none of those elements have to do with your environment, your supervisor, the culture of your organization, none of that. It's all internal. It's your skills and your knowledge of the roles and how much you can own them and trust them. So in order to understand that, you got to dive deep into the skills that you have. You can't trust skills if you don't know your skills. So oftentimes people who are confident, it's that not that they know everything content-wise, but the skill to adapt, they trust that. Their skill to learn on the fly, they trust that. Their skill to lead and bring people to consensus in a contentious space, they trust that. So when they get to these moments, they've already explored and reflected very intentionally on the skills. Now, when I talk to my athletes, I call them superpowers. So I'm going to go into that language because it still seems really weird to call them skills. But you should bring all your superpowers to your situations. You don't have to use them all the time, but you got to know your superpowers and you got to kind of be confident from a place of strength, perform from a place of strength. That doesn't mean behind the scenes you don't work on your skills, you don't polish them up, do professional development like this or other opportunities. You can still, but when you're in situations, perform from a place of strength. Mm-hmm. The reverse can also be true, right? So I have to give an athlete example because off the top of my head, I can't really think of a non-athlete example. So sorry, in the moment, I've like switched back into the athlete world. But let's say an athlete gets injured. Their confidence at a 10, 5 plus 5 is their default. But now they're not sure their ankle is going to hold up. They're not sure they can trust their skills of being fast, agile. So skills go down. What do they need to do now? They need to really own their role on the team. So their role might be to cheer on and support their teammates. Their role might be to be tactically aware and position their bodies in more favorable positions, depending on the sport, so that they can kind of alleviate the need for like those high pressure moments and pulling out those skills that they're not unsure of. So it's really about thinking through your knowledge of the role and how much you're going to own it. And it's not just positional roles, but like your contributions and then your skills. And I think when we start thinking about confidence in that way, oftentimes these moments where we pause, we're not sure we can do, we avoid moments, we can breathe, we can visualize, we can not be afraid of these emotions, we can acknowledge them, we can talk to our saboteurs productively, we can reflect. If you need to, revisit your skills, revisit your knowledge of the role that you're going to need to play in that environment, and understand whether you should, at that point, put yourself in those environments and opportunities. Oftentimes what happens is the decision then is made not from a place of fear, but from a place of information. And it's a game changer.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most of us, can't even imagine the level of pressure that some of these athletes are under. I mean, you're talking about the NBA finals right now. The idea that, I'm out there, I don't want to let my team down. I don't want to let my city down. I mean, everything is all about New York. It's we haven't done this in 50 years. I mean, most of us can't, or the Olympic athlete who has trained their entire lives, and it comes down to a 5-minute routine or the game-winning shot or whatever it is. Most of us can't imagine that level of pressure being in front of, millions of people. But the process is the same in managing that type of stress. So, and I appreciate the math problem for those of us like myself who are not CPAs or even particularly good at math. That really resonated. I found that's very, very helpful. So
I just
thank
want to add, you're giving examples of elite athletes, which is excellent, right? We think about some of these as like, if the highest pressured moments, right? Let me just tell you, the body, it doesn't matter that someone's judging it as an elite experience. And you don't even have to be the CEO of an organization to experience that level of stress. The combination of personal life stress, potentially personal, right? A family stressor, individual health stressor, some additional stressor at work, combined stress can manifest the same way as singular elite stress. There doesn't need to be a judgment value to it. And I think it's really important to understand for us as individuals that this isn't just going to work if I become a CEO or if I become the department head or if I lead this team, I'm going to need these tools. Quite the opposite. We need these tools every day and we should train them intentionally every day. So I do breath work every day. I do reflections every day. I may not always write them down. I'll be honest. I'm not the most consistent writing everything down and all my thoughts, but I do go through the exercise to give myself that moment and that pause. So it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It has to work for you. And not every tool, the other caveat here is not every tool is going to work for every person. And the good thing is there are so many tools to choose from, and I've only given you a couple today. There's lists and lists and lists of tools. And oftentimes when I work one-on-one, whether it's with executives or whether it's with professionals, whether it's with individual athletes, young and old, and different levels, and you're part of their journey, it's very customized. Like, let's figure out you as a person. What are the things that you are trying to improve in this moment? What are the situations you are in this season of your life? And how do we try to test with some curiosity, trial and error, maybe, tools that might work for you? There's no tool that works for everybody. And if it doesn't work for you, it's a challenge to remember to do it. It's not automatic. We want to find that fit. And that level of understanding and customization is so incredibly important because we are very, very different humans. And I even started our conversation with experiencing stressor will be different for you or for me. Some people's bodies just shut down, right? They get really relaxed. They get very tired under stress. They don't ramp up. Their bodies actually, their protection mechanism is to shut down. Well, supporting that individual is very different. You don't do longer exhales for them. Their heart rate is already slowing down. Their muscles are already relaxed. Instead, you want to give them tools to like try to ramp it back up, try to keep them engaged in the situation. So again, I think it's really important to think about things as individual, especially in this space. But hopefully there's some we've given enough kind of broad tools that allow people to test it out for themselves.
Absolutely. And I mean, the whole point of this topic today is that most of us aren't ever going to know. And it's okay. We don't have to be the elite athlete. Most of us aren't going to ever have that level of pressure, but we all experience pressure every day, and it's stressful for us and it's meaningful to us. And so that was the whole point of this conversation. And I've already learned so much. So this has been so interesting. I do want to get to some questions that we have in the chat, but I'd also would like to just ask if you just shared sort of some great key takeaways. Is there any other sort of final kind of key takeaway you would like to share with our audience before we get to some questions that kind of how we can all sort of take that next step to be stronger in that mind, body, heart connection?
Yeah. So I think the only thing I would add at this point, because I know we've talked a lot about tools, is pausing is okay. Whether it's a pause in the moment in a conversation or just hitting pause during your day, that oftentimes we think busy is successful, busy is productive. And that's not always true. So I would just encourage people to really understand that, and the pause doesn't have to be long. Like, just give yourself a moment. And it really does change things. So I know the chat is lighting up. I can
That
see
was
it.
lighting up. So we have some questions, and I've got a couple too that came in before today that I'd like to get to. So, how do you sort of one-on-one? How do you work with clients to develop? We had a question from Stacy. How do you develop others, and how do you kind of work that one-on-one coaching relationship? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So coaching, just in a more general sense, is very different than advising, mentoring, or therapy, in that coaching comes really from a place of questions and reflections, especially if it's old, right? So older individuals. So when I coach like a 10-year-old, it's gonna look different. But assuming we're talking about adults or near adults, it is a lot of questions. They're guided questions. And oftentimes the answer already lies inside you. But what's different in this space is my role is more like an athletic coach, in that I try to assess and understand where you are today, where you're trying to get to, understand the gap, and then set up like cones, right? Set up the drills that will help you get from point A to point B. Oftentimes, there's some amount of consistency and discipline in the use of your tools that we need to build in non-pressured moments, so that when you are under pressure, your default is to use the tool. And so my role is to get you really good in practice, right? So I'm doing a lot of air quotes here because, obviously it's mental performance. And unless you have a bubble above your head, I can't see what you think, right? So it's different than I'm trying to fix your technique in something, or I'm trying to teach you a concept that I then test you on. Like, the world will test you, and we'll gain that information. We'll thank the world for whatever information it gives us, and we'll use it to learn and grow. So it is very iterative. And different people's pace will be different. But my goal as your coach is to make sure you don't need me in the future, that you have enough tools in your toolkit, and especially for adults, you know why they work, you know how they work, you know how to use them for you, when to use them. And they're there, kind of like all the tools in my garage, right? When I first started out and my dad and mom gave me like a little yellow toolbox, I think there was like a couple of nails in it, a hammer, a screwdriver, a Phillips head, like a flathead and a Phillips head, and there were pliers, right? Basics, and maybe a box cutter. And that was it. And those things will handle a lot of household situations, right? But now if I look in the garage, there's a lot of types of screws, and there's a lot of different types of nails, and there's a lot of different types of pliers and wrenches, and a lot of tools that I probably don't even know the right names for. But if I want to hang, something on the wall, I still need that hammer to be in the garage. I may not need to put something on the wall all the time. And so this is where there's some amount of helping the individual develop and handle the moment, but also having them feel like they have enough tools to handle the majority of things. That engagement is the bulk of the engagement. Once that has occurred and they feel good and they've been able to do it consistently well, they're done with me in that moment. What sometimes happens is they evolve and their situations get different as well. So they might take on a CEO role, or they might take on, the captain of a team. They might go to college and all of a sudden the environment's super different. Then they might come back to get like either refreshers or like specific tools. Like you're not always going to need your wet back, but it's there. And it was only there because we had a situation. Right. So that's the concept of developing, but it is very much from a place of inquiry.
What about some tips to help combat procrastination? Anything you can quickly give us for those?
Yeah. So procrastination is a very good symptom of internal friction. It is the thing that we are seeing from a behavioral point of view. So I'm pretty sure I mentioned the kind of 3 key questions that I have people ask themselves. What am I avoiding by not starting or waiting? What story am I telling myself? And then decide which parts are true or not. And what would I do differently in this moment if I trusted the outcome would be good? Would I start or would I still not start? And those questions give you so much information about why the procrastination exists. Then you can decide whether you want to stay there or not. Some people procrastinate because they work better under pressure.
Yeah.
So if it works for you, then don't worry about it. But if you procrastinate and then you can't fulfill the task and you can't reach your goals because then you just, let's say you sheerly run out of time, then it's not productive. And maybe that kind of reflection in those questions will help you uncover the piece that you can adjust or that you're willing to adjust. So that would be my kind of quick answer. Procrastination is a challenging one because oftentimes it's very deeply rooted in other things.
Yep. Yep. Well, I am just getting all these wonderful thank yous, and I learned a lot from you in the chat. So, as I knew it would happen, the hour has been far too short.
Yes.
But I want to thank you, Nassim, so much for your time today. We really, I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. And so thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. I wanted to let you all know that Nassim has some additional resources on her website, becomingmystrongerme.com. So please go there. There's some great resources. There's links to her podcast. There's a lot of additional information. And as she mentioned, she's developed a toolkit that is specific to this audience. So please email her directly at nassim@becomingmystrongerme.com for that toolkit. Thank you for that, Nassim. So again, thank you so much for being here. I also wanted to encourage everyone to follow MCB on our social media channels and to, we've got our next Women in Business event next June. If you have any ideas for future events, we would love to hear from you. Stay in touch with us. We will be out in the community at the Arlington Chamber Women in Business Networking events. So come see us there, where we partner with the Chamber on those events throughout the year. And we're also members of the Northern Virginia Chamber. So we're over there. It's a lot of their events. So hopefully we'll see you in the community. Again, please stay in touch with us through our social channels. And we look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you again to our wonderful guest. And thank you all for tuning in. It was a terrific 60 seconds, minutes. It all went way too quickly. But thank you for your time and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.